Some say that life's challenges are merely hurdles to overcome. But what if they are also the endings of one chapter and the unexpected catalyst for the next? Maybe it is a necessary ending. Hello and welcome. You're listening to Life with Libby Joy, a podcast to explore the journey of womanhood, our challenges, our successes, and our experiences. It is my hope that you will be informed and inspired through our conversations and stories shared by women who are navigating this journey called life. I am your host, Libby Joy, and we will be going through this journey of life together. Our main theme today is transitions, and we're going to begin actually at the end. Not only changes or transitions in your life, but necessary endings. And actually, that's where I found this information we're going to talk about today. It's a book by Dr. Henry Cloud, and it's called Necessary Endings. And actually, I'll read the end of this. It says it's for employers or businesses and relationships. And it says this, that all of us have to give up in order to move forward. And so today's topic is really connecting to me right now. I'm in the midst of a major transition or ending of one chapter of my life to go to the next. And so if you can hear the echoes in this room, I am moving. And so lots of my stuff is moved away. And so you do hear the sounds of someone who may be moving soon. Actually, I only have a few more days here in the space I'm in. And so I thought it was just kind of, a good thought to talk about endings of things, as I am also in the midst of ending my journey in this chapter of my life. And I will tell you more later about what I'm doing next. It's exciting. But today's episode is just a part one of a two-part series I'm doing. And I'm actually also going to have a person coming on to talk about transitions in one of my episodes as well. We are going to be talking about necessary endings. This book talks about why endings are such a challenge for us and why people often hate endings. And I full disclosure from me, I am one of those people who truly hate endings of things. Of course, the endings of people you love and death is a very traumatic experience for all of us. But not only those endings, the endings of saying goodbye, you're leaving a job or you're leaving an area or you're moving forward to something new. Those are also challenges or difficulties. Me, I also have a challenge in saying goodbye to basic things like TV series and shows. I said it. Yeah, I'm just being honest, being real. I have not seen the ends of most of the TV shows that I love. Just give you an example. I have not seen the end of How to Get Away with Murder. I don't know. Did they get away with murder? What happened at the end? I heard there was a twist to it. And yet, I don't know because I didn't see that last one. Recently, The Equalizer was supposed to end this season. I have not seen that last show. I think I'm going to try, but I don't know. It's hard for me to say goodbye to even fictional characters in fictional stories that literally have really nothing to do with my life. And yet I can't seem to say goodbye to them. And then just another one, Lost. You know how many years it has been since Lost was out? And I still don't know if those people were even found because I never saw the ending of Lost. So that's just me. I'm going to just be honest. I truly have a problem with endings. And so this book, Necessary Endings, is really helpful for me. And I thought it would be helpful for you today. So today's topic, we're really just going to talk about just 10 things that he mentioned in his book of the reasons why people don't like or avoid endings. And I'm going to go through each of them and we're going to just talk a little bit about them today. And then the next time we meet, we're going to talk about some things to help us move forward in our transitions. But I want you to see if you can connect or relate to any of these endings and why we don't like them. And that'll help us to move forward in our journey of life. And yes, I'm going to find joy in the midst of all of this necessary endings we talk about today. That's because I would love to hear how we can make this particular part of our life joyful as well. So let's get started. One of the top 10 reasons he mentioned in his book, the first one is we are afraid of the unknown. When something ends, we don't really know what is going to be next. We don't understand it and we don't know. And so we get nervous about these endings. I think that's a big one. I know for me that when something ends, the expectations of what we're moving forward in makes you nervous. You don't know what's going to happen at the new job, or you don't know in this new community that you're moving to if you're going to find people or meet your connected group as you did in the past. We don't know what's going to happen. And that scares us or frightens us. And oftentimes, that's why people stay stuck. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes, because we don't know what's going to happen next. And that's the life journey. Each day is something new. There's a new excitement. There's a new challenge. There's a new memory that is created. And we don't really know what's going to happen. We can go in that fearful mode of being scared and feeling like we don't have control, so we don't want to know. Or we can do the opposite and take it as a life excitement and a challenge and a joy that would be something that we could connect to later. Just a way to spin that concept of the unknown. Yes, I don't know what's going to happen, but I do know that each day that you get a day of life, it's a new day to start over again. And that's a great thing. So that was the first one. We're afraid of the unknown. Second, he says, we fear confrontation. This specifically talks about when you're ending relationships or even ending job situations, that you don't want to confront or tell people that you're leaving. You don't want to be the bearer of bad news. You don't want to make people upset with you or uncomfortable. And we'll talk about that in a minute about hurting feelings. You don't want to do things that could particularly cause a grief or anxiety in you or in someone else, especially relationships. When we've decided that whatever relationship we're in, taking either your spouse or your significant other, that when you say, I don't want to be a part of this relationship anymore, there's a confrontation that happens. Either that person disagrees with you and you all have to have the really strong conversation. I'm not going to even say argument. Let's just say a strong conversation about what is wrong or what you don't like or why you're not happy in your current situation. We don't like that as people. We don't like conflict. We try to avoid conflict at any point. And unfortunately, sometimes we have to actually experience that kind of confrontation. I will say it right now here in the disclaimer. Obviously, I am not a therapist. I am just speaking from this book and just about my own life experiences. But I know confrontation is a hard one for us. We like our lives smooth and without conflict and without chaos. We like peace. I do too. But sometimes those hard conversations are necessary for us to move from where we are in chaos or in confusion or in sadness in our life to move forward to make a difference. Okay, it's a lot. Let's keep going. The next reason, it says, we do not know if ending is actually necessary or if it or if he is fixable. Again, going back to that relationship piece, we want to give people the benefit of the doubt, and we don't want to just throw away something, especially if you've been working at this relationship for some years. You don't want to throw away the years you've had in building the relationship. But at some point, if you feel that this is not moving forward or it's not progressing forward, if you feel that you are being abused in any way, either physically, emotionally, spiritually, in the situation, if you realize that, this doesn't have a future. I was watching a TV show the other day and the lady had twins by the guy and they had been in a relationship for over 6 years and he didn't even think to propose marriage to her. And so she decided to break it off. And then a month later, he was dating a new lady. And 2 months later, he was married to that other lady. And so she realized in her relationship that it wasn't progressing forward, that it wasn't a good fit. Even though they had been together for all those years, they weren't going to be each other's future. And those are tough conversations again, the conflict. But sometimes we feel like maybe there's hope. I believe in marriage. I believe in relationships. I believe that counseling is always important if you feel like your marriage is not where you would like it to be. I don't think you should just give up on marriage or give up on relationships. However, it takes two in every relationship. If your spouse or your significant other is not a part of the journey of healing and relationships and connecting, then you do have to rethink, is this something that I want to stay in? Those are hard conversations. And so that's another reason why we don't want to end things, because we still try to keep fixing it. But some things, unfortunately, can't be fixed. And that's a hard one. Okay. That could be you. So we have to think about those things. Our next one. We are afraid of hurting someone. Again, that goes into what I talked about, conflict and saying that you want out of a situation. You're afraid of hurting someone. You don't want to be the person that walks away. You don't want to be the person that gives bad news or brings bad news to someone. We want to protect people's feelings, sometimes at the expense of our own. And we have to be careful in this journey called life. This is our lives. And we have to make sure that we are happy with the decisions that we make. And while we don't want to hurt people intentionally, we can't stay in a situation or in a place because it will hurt someone else's feelings. Even when you leave jobs and you have to leave, and the situation at your job needs 3 people and you're one of the 3. And so now they're down to 2 people, and those 2 people are going to work extra hard because you're gone. Well, if you need to leave for whatever reason you decided to leave, you can't be responsible for what the job does to pick up your slack. That's a challenge. And I know that I'm speaking personally from when we have made decisions to transition. My husband and I, we had to leave certain jobs and certain people. And we're sad by that. And we know that there are some hurt there and some tears that were shed. But you have to really do what you are purposed to do in life. You can't stay stuck in a situation because you're afraid to hurt somebody else. You need to make sure that you're being true to yourself and being honest with yourself on why you need to move and make this transition. Again, lots of information. These are the reasons why we don't like endings, because there's a lot to deal with in our lives. And we're going to reflect on which one of these things we really are having trouble with in a few minutes. The next one, we don't know the right words to use. We don't know how to say goodbye. We don't know how to end things. We don't know how to transition well with our words. Saying goodbye is part of how we have to say it's over. Saying the words, and sometimes we need to maybe write those out. Sometimes we may need to look up something. We can read a good book. This book is very helpful for people who have hard times with transitions. Maybe it helps you to have some language. And there is a lot of really good language in here for the ways in which you can transition correctly and efficiently. Words that we're not used to saying. Words that are I instead of you. Those are always good words, even in discussing your situation with your spouse or significant other or your boss. Not you're doing this and you did this, instead of using the I. And that's something you learned in therapy. That's something we've learned just in our conversations with marriage counselors, and to use your I statements. And so these types of words and language, sometimes we don't have. Or sometimes, let me not say we don't have it, sometimes we don't take time to stop and reflect in order to actually use the correct language. Sometimes we are speaking in anger or we're speaking in haste, and we don't stop and reflect on what we're going to say before we actually say it. And so we can rephrase, I don't like how I feel when you yell at me, instead of saying you always yell at me. I don't appreciate being left out of situations, instead of saying you always leave me out. And there's other ways you can do that, but you see the point that When you sit there and you really reflect on what you want to say, you can reword the language to make it more effective, meaningful, conversational in your movement. Moving along, we are afraid of letting go and the sadness associated with an ending. This one is me, because that's why I can't even finish fictional TV series, because I don't like the sadness that is an ending. We think about sadness, we always think about tears, emotional pain or struggle, but sometimes you just have a sadness just missing something that you enjoy, something that you love, or you laughed, or it made you smile, or it was your happy place, and that's not there anymore. So these tears or this sadness is a part of an ending. Even when we talk about ending relationships or ending locations of where we live, moving from one place to the other, we find that we're missing something we used to enjoy, and there's a sadness that comes over us. This is normal. This is not unusual. This is not strange. There's no need for therapy to say why you feel sadness. However, you do need to learn how to process the sadness or the emotions. That's when therapy comes in. So we'll talk about that later. All right. The next one they have is very similar to that point. We have too many and too painful endings in our personal story or history, so we avoid another one. If we've ever had a painful ending, we assume or project a painful ending on the next situation. We've had a lot of them that were painful, or we've had a lot of stress when it comes to ending things. And so we assume that the next one will also be painful. Every transition isn't painful. Every ending is not hard or harsh, but we project it. We assume that it's going to be the same way it has always been. This projection is a challenge, because our human mind remembers how hard something was, and then we remember that as we do something else. The next one, it talks about when the endings are forced upon us, we do not know how to process them, and we sink or flounder. If we don't know there's going to be an ending, that's when we tend to sink or flounder, that we haven't been able to process it. Usually I would think of these kind of endings, for example, when a job lets you go, not necessarily because of your productivity, but maybe because they're downsizing, that fancy word, downsizing. In teacher language, we say we are displaced teachers, that the budget doesn't handle you anymore, and they move you either to another location, or you have to find a job in another location. And these kind of endings are not endings you saw coming. They usually come in and they tell you on a Tuesday, and maybe in a couple of weeks you have to go, or at the end of the year they tell you that your position will not be there for the next year. And so these endings are things that you were not expecting, and so the process of these endings becomes a challenge. So that is a hard one, and this is usually when we can sink into things like depression, or we can sink into anger or frustration because we didn't even see it coming. That's again when we need to talk to somebody to process our emotions and our feelings. Again, all normal, all natural, but we do need to make sure that we process how we feel about this transition that was given to us. And while we don't like how it ended, that ending was probably necessary. And I do believe that all things work together for the good. That's where my faith kicks in. I have a Romans 8:28 spirit that believes that it will benefit me in the end. But just to be honest, sometimes, all the time, it doesn't feel good when the ending happens without you knowing it's coming. That's a hard one. That shock and challenge of not being able to process it is a challenge. It's a difficulty. And so this is one I find particularly a hard one on a necessary ending, because even though we don't feel like it's necessary, often it is necessary for whatever reason. When companies don't need you any longer or don't want you somewhere, we have to be reminded that we are worth value, and there will be a company or a project or a placement or a relationship that will want you. and will want all of who you are and all that you have to offer. Those bad breakups that you have, and he didn't think, you were good for him. You weren't. But that doesn't mean you're not good. I'm telling somebody because I'm speaking to me. When I was going through those things, I had to be reminded that because I am not your cup of tea, doesn't mean I'm not someone else's cup of tea. Someone else's trash is someone else's treasure. It's a good statement, but it's true. That you will find who will be able to benefit best from the skills that you have and the talents that you possess in this life. The next one, we hang on too long when we should end something now. This is important because sometimes we see the writing on the wall that either our job or our relationship has ended or is ending, and we still want to hold on because it's familiar and it's comfortable for us. But we have to be reminded not to hold on too long. This book is also talking about businesses, and I read a book before. It's I think it was called Good to Great, and it talked about how companies held on to how they did things because they'd always done them that way. And then when technology happened and the market changed, they still stuck to what they used to do, and it didn't prove them well. And they mentioned all the different companies. And if I mentioned a couple of them to you now, you would realize that they no longer exist because they were bought out by the market. And all of that to say, and I'm not a corporate personality, but all that to say, if you realize that there is a new shift or a change that has to be made, you need to make that shift and make that change. Holding on to something just because it's comfortable doesn't mean it is important or good for you. It's just something that you feel at ease with. And sometimes your at ease messes you up and you don't realize that you need to move and go forward. I like, again, why he mentions that necessary endings. It says that all of us have to give up in order to move forward. That's a hard one, that you have to give up in order to move forward. There are some things that we have to let go of in order for us to move to our next chapter or our next phase. And so I'm going to encourage you today, if you're looking at your life and trying to figure out where you're going and what's ending in your life and why you're in this place, see what you're giving up and what you can move forward in. The giving up of a job, and I am giving up of a job. I'm giving up a place. I'm moving out of state. And I'm giving up some things, some friends. I'm not giving them up. I'm just giving up seeing them as often as I do now. But I realize that I am moving forward to something brand new and exciting. I'm moving forward to being closer to family. I'm moving forward to new opportunities. I'm moving forward to growth. And I'm moving forward to things I do not know. But I know that I will have some great things coming my way, new opportunities. And sometimes your placement is important for where you're going. Sometimes where you are now can't hold what you're going into, and you have to move. And that's a hard one, but sometimes we have to just move. So don't stay stuck. Don't stay stuck. If you have to let go, remind yourself you're letting go. You're giving up something in order for you to move to something else. Okay? And I think this next one is where I'm going to talk about next week more. We do not possess the skills to execute the endings. In other words, we don't have the tools to end things. We have not given ourselves the right words and the right language and even the right mindset to end, because we are so focused on what we're giving up and we're not looking to what we're going toward. And so next week, I am actually going to talk about 5 strategies for us moving forward in these endings. And so please come back next week for that, because that's a big, important part of this, that we haven't gotten ourselves ready for our endings. There are some strategies that we need to take for our endings that we know are coming for sure, and even being ready for endings we are not quite prepared for. But if we have these tools in our tool belt, it will help us become good at endings. So I hope that after I talk to you today, that I'll even be able to see the endings of some shows, right? Maybe I'll find out if the lost people ever were found. Maybe I'll see, did they get away with murder, or was there even a murder to get away with? Maybe I'll find out, what happens on the Equalizer, how they ended that situation, because it's important to get to the end. There are necessary endings, and we have to remind ourselves we're giving up something to go to the next level. The question they posed in the book, Dr. Cloud posed, and I'm going to leave with you today. As you reflect on these reasons that I talked about today, can you think of any situations where these reasons have interfered with the ending you needed to make? That's what I want you to think about. Have any of these reasons I mentioned, reasons that interfered with an ending you needed to make? And when we need to make an ending, we have to be reminded there's reasons for the ending. And if these reasons I talked about today are causing you to not make that ending, or you're fearful of the unknown, or you're scared of how you'll feel, there's sadness, or you're overwhelming, it could be too painful, you don't want to hurt someone's feelings, whatever those things that we mentioned today, think about it. Are they stopping you or holding you back from some things you have to end? Some things have to end. Just like this broadcast today, it has to end. And so those are the things I talked about this way. I usually give you tips. I mentioned them all. These are the things that we have to look at when we're talking about necessary endings. I gave you some reasons that we find endings to be challenging and painful and often sad. Reasons why we don't like or we avoid endings. I mentioned a few. We are afraid of the unknown, or we fear confrontation, or we don't possess the skills to execute a necessary ending. We're going to talk about strategies next week. Again, I've made this a 2-part series because I want you to really hone in on why you're feeling the way you're feeling. Next week, we'll talk about how to have the tools and the resources we need to move forward for our necessary endings. So that's it for this episode of Life with Libby Joy. I'm Libby Joy. Thank you for joining our conversation today on necessary endings and making transitions and how to handle them. I will be with you next week to talk about some tools, some skills in making these endings something that you can handle. Tune in next week, Tuesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And please subscribe and share this podcast with a friend. Remember to enjoy the journey.